Ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed guests, thank you all for coming and taking out times out of your busy schedules here with us today on sustainability reporting, stakeholders consultation. Without any further ado, let us begin with a few verses from the recitation of the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان.
Now, let us formally commence with the proceedings with the welcoming address. And for the welcoming address, I'd like to call upon on stage Mr. Farooq Rahman. Now, Mr. Farooq is a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. He qualified back in 1996 and is a partner at A.F. Ferguson's & Co. Chartered Accountants. Mr. Farooq has been elected as a member of the Council for the term 2013 to 17, 2017 to 21, and as Vice President for the term 2017 to 2018. He is also the chairman of the Accounting Standards Board and Education Committee of the Institute. He has also served in the capacity of chairman and member at various committees, boards, and task force of ICAP, including the Examination Committee, Auditing Standards Committee, Financial Sector Committee, Insurance Committee, Chartered Accountants Women Committee, Corporate Law Review Task Force, Anti-Money Laundering Task Force, and Quality Assurance Board. And that is an amazing introduction. Please welcome Council Member Mr. Farooq Rahman with a huge round of applause.
Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, on behalf of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan, I extend my warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for coming. Today, our objective of inviting you all here is to discuss the International Financial Reporting Standards, S1, S2. These are the two standards issued by the International Sustainability Standards Board. So the standards have already been issued, and now around the world there is discussion how and in what manner these standards have to be adopted. So I'll further discuss on that point, but just to give you a brief background on how we have reached to this stage. In November 2021, at the COP26, this announcement was made that an international sustainability standard board is formed. What this standard, this board significance in this announcement has been that this was in the same structure as International Accounting Standard Board is. So that is the board that issues IFRS accounting standards. So we are all aware of, many of you are members of the Institute Accountant. We are all, part of preparing the financial statement. So for financial statements, the underlying framework in Pakistan and in more than 140 countries has been the IFRS. So this board, which is a sister organization or a sister board within the IFRS foundation structure, where we already have an IASB, which issues the accounting standards, and now we have the ISSB, which is issuing the sustainability standards. So both are, in terms of their stature, are equivalent. So this was a very successful model, and it is said that IFRS are the gold standard of financial reporting. So this is an addition to the financial reporting, you can say, or a corporate reporting, that this standard is going to, this board is going to issue these standards. So the first two standards were issued within 18 months of the formation. This is extraordinary. At least I have not seen any, even the accounting standard issued from the IFRS within the 18 months period. It's usually the discussion, exposure draft, and so on and so forth. So within 18 months, in June, or rather specifically on 26th of June 2023, these standards were issued. So only two standards were issued, but the significance of these two standards is that it comprehensively covers the overall sustainability. Many of people which I interact, they ask this question, what is sustainability and what do you mean by sustainability reporting? So today, really, the objective is not to explain the standard. It is more, we wanted to hear from you about these standards, but just to refresh you, Imran in his subsequent presentation will also talk about this and will give you a brief overview. But for you to understand, sustainability is around for every entity, you name it, whether it is a small entity or a very large entity. अगर हम commonly अगर कहें कि एक पान वाले की दुकान है या एक दूध वाला कोई बेचता है या there's a plain कोई बनाता है. So for every entity, they are dependent upon certain resources. So if you are in textile, you are dependent upon cotton. If you are in household, you may be dependent upon water. And if you are in telecommunication, you will be dependent upon energy. So you are dependent upon resources to carry out your business activity. Similarly, every entity has relationships with people. You have human resource to serve your organization. You have relationship in any aspect with the government, with any regulation. So principally, you are dependent upon resources and you are dependent upon you have relationships. So the impact of those, their interaction of any entity with these resources and relationship affects your cash flows. Your revenues, your costs are dependent upon that. So this is really the very basic concept of sustainability, that for every entity, there is this relationship. And now how we are going to capture all of that in terms of sustainability. Right? So this is a new language, and I have been saying in other forums as well, that to understand this concept of sustainability, please go and listen to the speech given by the chairman of ISSB on 26th of June 2023. And in that, very, very effectively, it's a 25-minute speech. You can Google it and you can find it. So you can very, very precisely, effectively, that the chairman has explained the concept around the sustainability. Now, moving forward, why the accountants now have been involved. We are sitting in the institute, and so here the concept is that these standards have been issued for primary users of financial reporting. So it is exactly the same as for your financial statements. So those who are the users of your financial statements, they are going to be the users of these the sustainability reporting. So understand it, it is the target audience is exactly the same as for financial statements. Then who are the primary users? So the standard explains it that the users are three: one, investors, lenders, and creditors, right? So these are the primary users. So in terms of the standards focus, that is investor focused. These standards are investor focused. So this is the information that is required by the investors. It is going to serve the needs of the investor, right? So it is equivalent, as I've said, for financial statements, right? So the disclosure that are going to come in the sustainability reporting will constitute sustainability related financial information. So that is the concept behind this whole sustainability. The way we have structured it today is not a seminar only, it's more of question and answer. Wanted to give you an overall background. There will be, we have ISSB here as well. They are also connected. So we'll be having a speech from ISSB. Imran, who is our technical director, he's going to give you an overview of the standard very briefly. But two additional things that we will be presenting today, and that is one is about how and what categories of companies are to be, made, are required to be making this sustainability report. So the categories, the criteria of application, we will be, it's a draft, so it is going to generate debate. I'm sure there'll be comments from you, and we'll be assembling that. We have within the Institute a working group where we have multiple stakeholders part of that. We'll be putting all those suggestions over there. And then finally, it will go to SSCP. We have very kindly Musarrat Jabin. She has flown from Islamabad, especially for this event. Many thanks. So we'll be giving recommendations to SSCP for its ultimate notification, as we do for accounting standards. The second thing is that if you go through the IFRS S1, it gives multiple options about where to give this information. It could be part of your annual report. Some disclosures can come into your financial statements. Some can come in the director's report. So the approach that we have developed, and of course, that is subject to your comments and other forum where we're going to discuss those. What is going to be the structure of the reporting? So when we have financial statements, the first page will be of balance sheet. Then you will have profit and loss account. So we need to give a proper structure of this report so that there should be comparison and consistency of reporting that should come. So that is another thing that we will be presenting to. After that, we will have an open Q&A. Any questions, any observation, anything, so that we can note those suggestions. I will try to answer those questions, clarify them. And if we are unable to, then of course we will make note of that, and we'll be deliberating all your suggestions, and we'll come out with a final recommendation that will go to SSCP. Thank you.
Thank you, as always, Mr. Farooq Rahman. And for the people sitting at the back, if I may request some of you to please come in front for a better view, if you like. Again, it is your choice. And now let us move on to the first keynote speech by Ms. Musarrat Jabin, who has joined us all the way from Islamabad. And if we could have a short, if we can have it on the screen as well, a short introduction of Ms. Musarrat. Now, Ms. Musarrat is an executive director at the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan. Currently, she is heading as the chairman, Secretariat, International Relations, AML, and is also the official spokesperson. Ms. Jabin has over 25 years of experience in public policy, governance, and oversight of capital markets. She has also been extensively involved in devising regulatory frameworks covering structural reforms, new products, good governance, increased transparency, and the list goes on. She has represented SECP on various national and international forums. And last but not least, Mrs. Jabin is spearheading SECP's efforts in sustainability-related regulatory reforms and leading SECP team devising ESG roadmap and action plan. Please welcome, with a huge round of applause, Ms. Musarrat Jabin.
Thank you so much. It was supposed to be a short introduction, went a bit longer, which was not required though. But thank you very much, Farooq Rahman Saab, Asad Feroz Saab, ICAP members, and here the ICAP Council members as well for inviting me over for today's event, this consultative session, of course. Not for this keynote speech, definitely, but for providing me an opportunity or learning opportunity, in fact, because I hope to learn a lot and hear from your side, you being the practitioners and the companies, of course, who would be involved in going forward in this ESG ecosystem. So just to formalize, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, coming to the theme of today's session, I will not go into the details as to why sustainability is important and why Pakistan is supposed to be adhering to its commitments, to the global commitments as well. But I would like to touch upon, the regulator's role about, how we feel and what our perception is about sustainability considerations. I have some focused questions myself as well, and some key challenges that we foresee in this, entire work plan, and the future priorities that we would like to set. So, a strengthening disclosure, of course, is sorry. So strengthening disclosure practices is, of course, something which is very key to the regulatory pillars that we've set for ourselves at the SECP. And after the issuance of, the sustainability standards of S1 and S2, it is now important to focus on how and to what extent we move towards adopting these sustainability reporting standards. And as Farooq Saab also said, we'll probably need to look a lot more into our local scenario, the undergrounds, the basic, the pillars that we have in our local system, and at first address those before we move ahead with it. So I've time and again also emphasized at various forums that one of the key challenges, which I feel personally also myself, that the regulators, investors, and other stakeholders face is the lack of, access to globally comparable sustainability information. Because the information flow, of course, is one of the key elements in this entire program. The developments being made by ISSP, of course, are a game changing for the sustainability reporting globally. And the questions I would like to put towards the participants today, and which we have to jointly try addressing, would be as follows. How well are companies prepared? That's, of course, the first and foremost thing. How do we really have the requisite capacity and the skill set? Do we possess the resources and the mechanism to address these huge data gap that we foresee? What precise timeline do we look at for our companies to adapt these sustainability standards? So these are not just, of course, questions coming from a regulator, because I here would like to give a disclaimer also that I'm not speaking necessarily on behalf of the Commission. It's my personal or professional thoughts that I'm just expressing. So, and these are not questions which we would disagree with, but I think most of us would actually agree that these are the basic ones that we need to address before we move ahead. So on the regulatory side, the implementation and adherence to sustainability standards, of course, is largely driven by the IOSCO, which has finally, of course, endorsed these standards, and which has expectations that its members, and Pakistan being, of course, its member, we used to be on IOSCO board till 2022 for about more than 9 years, in fact, 12 years now. And now we still remain their member, although not being on their board. The members are supposed to consider the ways in which we will adopt, apply, or at least otherwise be informed of the ISP standards. So it has a very, I would say, a flexible kind of a environment that IOSCO has created by this statement itself, is that it's just not the implementation. It has to start from scratch, before we reach the heights of the building. So it is that we need to understand our responsibilities, try to implement it, and then, of course, reach the stage where we say that, yes, we have implemented those standards. So clearly, IOSCO expects the capital markets that they should be prepared to implement these standards, and therefore identifying, assessing, measuring, and reporting sustainability-related risks and opportunities, as well as the data collection and analysis of ESG matrix is totally inevitable. So the adoption guide that has been presented by IFRS Foundation and ISSB shall also provide guidance on realigning regulatory approach, and the SECP is very much on top of these items, and that we as a regulator are cleanly pursuing ever evolving ESG arena globally to ensure that consistent and comparable information about sustainability risks and opportunities is available to the investors and to make their informed decisions in the capital market. Before I delve into the challenges that we as a regulator foresee, I would like to briefly walk you through the SECP journey. Most probably you would, most of your participants would probably already know about it, but I think, communication has always been an issue throughout our market. So I'll just go through it very quickly. That primarily we all have witnessed that the role of regulator has evolved as a facilitator. So the strengthening transparency, fostering sustainability development, and collaborating with all the stakeholders, ensuring that there is a long-term environmental and social sustainability goal implementation environment is our foremost duty. So the corporate governance regime, the current one under the corporate governance, the Code of Corporate Governance regulation, the ownership of ESG policies rests with the board of directors of the companies. And it's also made of disclosures are made through their annual reports and director's report. So there was, however, a need for a more focused and holistic way forward from the regulator as well as from the stakeholders. So what we've been observing before also, and I think this is something which we've been time and again stressing also, is that there's lots of work going on in silos. There's lots of work going on in different, compartments of the entire system. But we needed to come up with, a more of a holistic and centralized approach so that we all are on the same page. So, keeping in view the best practices and as well as local considerations. So the SECP then came up with a position paper in 2022 on the ESG. The position paper gave a simplistic, milestone kind of a based off a wish list with the purpose to just start off discussions, on the ESG consideration itself. So it was just to, actually support and motivate people start discussing this project itself. So our advocacy session, which we started in 2023 in partnership with a multilateral, we held that in Karachi, was very positively received by the stakeholders of the capital market. So subsequently, in coordination with ICAP, we then had a very positively driven capacity building workshop in Lahore also, that was in May 2023. And very kindly actually supported by ICAP again, we had few seminars on capacity building for the regulator, ourselves, for PSX as the regulator, and some other capital market institution. That was again, mid of this year. So the purpose was basically to develop the in-house capacity, because it would not be unjust to say that, that even at the regulator level, we are at very recent and very nascent kind of a stage when it comes to the ESG ecosystem. So, but what is encouraging, of course, is to see that in a very short period of time, perhaps less than a year, in fact, the journey evolved as a more synergized kind of a collective efforts evolving into an ESG action plan. So that followed the initial ESG roadmap, which we introduced. Later now with the draft action plan that is under consultation with the stakeholders. We've received also input from ICAP. We've received it from many other stakeholders, including PICG, PSX, and others, PBCs. So that's so we try to come out of that a basic milestone kind of a thing to more focused areas in our this action plan. Sorry. So we expanded the milestones, as I said, into more core areas of focus, opening up the partnership with key stakeholders. So, and one of those focus areas as part of that action plan is the ESG sustain, which one of, as I said, is basically a platform, a digital platform that it's going to provide for the dissemination of ESG related information and data. And I'm pleased to share with you that, Farooq Saab, we've already entered into an agreement with the multilateral that's going to establish this online dashboard called ESG Sustain. And it's going to be a one-stop repository for all sustainability related laws, regulations, guidelines, any kind of case studies, data that for capacity building, material and data and information that the companies would like to actually have it reflected on the ESG Sustain. So I'm also very grateful to all the institutions, including ICAP, certainly, that has provided their consent for operation of the dashboard once it's up and running. Another development which I would like to share with all of you is the preliminary ESG disclosure guide that is currently in a draft form under consideration at the ACCP. So it will initially be applicable on voluntary basis. And after consultative review from all the stakeholders, we're hoping that this guide is going to be, it's more of a simplified kind of a checklist that it would encourage listed companies to report their ESG related, risks, achievements, challenges, and data on, how to actually report that information into that. So it's going to be a checklist of, just to support, the listed companies, how to go about it. And it's going to be, of course, have some kind of, matrices that are definitely, recognized by the World Federation of Exchanges and Sustainability Exchange Initiatives, and which are currently being adopted also by majority of the listed companies worldwide. So since our listed companies are relatively much familiar with the G or governance aspects, so this guide is going to concentrate on the E and the, S part of it. And these two pillars are, of course, something which we also thought, should be more concentrated upon as it comes to the disclosures with respect to this guide. So it will, again, as I said, would have all those matrices, reference to those matrices as well for us. So it's easier for you to, comprehend and then, report the data accordingly. So that ESG guide will not only foster, in my personal opinion, also just the accountability part of it, but it's also going to enable the and make the stakeholders and the investor to make more informed decisions. So down the lane, just to add to it, in addition to this disclosure guide, there's going to be an ESG regulatory guide, which we are again working on. And it will be introduced, which will be incorporate the learnings from the ESG disclosure guide, and also provide more an extent of adoption of these sustainability standards, which inshallah hope to, once we received all those documents and input from your side as well as ICAP. So that's going to be very helpful in terms of setting those standards in the financial statement. So now briefly, I will touch upon some of the key challenges that we foresee as the regulator. First and foremost, of course, as mentioned earlier as well, is that we need to understand and we need to have the understanding of the diversity of the underlying sectors that requires proportionate and scalable reporting framework, because every industry has its own peculiar challenges. And the requirements, as also some of the very generic ones explained by Farooq Saab with respect to resources, with respect to the human relationships, etc. That's something which is common and central. But otherwise, every industry has its own peculiar challenges. So particularly the knowledge of data regarding climate risk, of course, is almost next to none. So considering ISSB has identified potential projects with respect to biodiversity, human capital, and human rights and integrated reporting in future, we must assess as to how well we are prepared to tackle the underlying reporting requirements as and when they are notified. Therefore, prior to requirements, these requirements and whenever they are notified, before they are made part of the reporting frameworks being in place, the placement of industry, as I said, vis-a-vis their capability to adopt to these new systems requires an in-depth analysis. So the SCCP, of course, we at the SCCP believe in communication and a consultative process. And this is the reason I've been always saying that it has to be more of a phased approach. It has to be through a consultative, approach. There can't be a one size fit for all. So as I said, this is not something which needs to be enforced. It is something which needs to be adopted by choice and by will. And then unless and until we start adopting it, by our own will and choice, something being enforced by the regulator or our international requirement would not serve the purpose which we would actually as a nation like to see, Pakistan achieving, because we have certainly certain international commitments as well. So the second challenge is devising appropriate mechanism for generation, analysis, reporting, and assurance of robust, accurate information on sustainability matrix. So this will require certainly resources. It will require your time, commitment from all the stakeholders. But if the will is there, I'm sure we are going to reach there. So thirdly, once again, as I would like to reiterate that capacity building of professionals with respect to their unique business architecture, knowledge of system, processes, and ability of connecting strategic and financial information is a challenge, but it is probably one of the most key challenges as well. So therefore, I would like to urge upon all the stakeholders to collaborate and build synergies for giving strategic direction to the ESG action plan, which we are kind of in a finalization stage, and which will, in my personal opinion, would also give a pivot to the challenges in more holistic manner. Now, coming to the SCCP's view with respect to its priorities in the future. First and foremost is that the SCCP shall continue to follow a synergized approach through sectoral awareness sessions, capacity building, and moving towards tangible action plan in collaboration with all the stakeholders of the ESG ecosystem. So I'm glad to see that we have gathered in this roundtable or this, this seminar or this consultative session that we can call it, being organized by ICAP. So it's one of the, obviously this is the reason we are all here is to, in my opinion, is also to assess the impact of these standards on the financial statements. And of course, when we will open up the forum for discussions, we will have a lot more insight from what's, what your expectations are and challenges are. Because in my view, we probably will not be able to resolve all the problems that would be highlighted. We will not be able to cater to all those challenges that we may highlight today. But what counts is that we sit together and we start actually opening our minds and see that, what we would like to achieve for our future. So I'm not expecting necessarily that, issues are going to be resolved or we are going to be receiving, suggestions which are going to be, taking care of all the challenges. But as I said, it's more of a brainstorming session where we can, start the discussions around these areas. Furthermore, since sustainability reporting is a key element of the ESG action plan, it is imperative that the ICAP, and which we were, informally also discussing with Farooq Saab in collaboration with institutions like PSX, and they are already in engagement with PSX, PBC, OICCIs, and other companies, expand its advocacy and capacity building outreach to the listed companies in different sectors. So based on the interaction through these sessions, ICAP, I'm sure, will be able to gauge and address the gaps of data information system, resources, as well as capacity. This will help us in determining as to what extent companies are actually ready to adopt the disclosure practices and reporting frameworks. So the challenge before ICAP, of course, is huge and multifaceted. But SCCP continues to support and operate and cooperate and progressively encourage all efforts in this regard. So you've got all our support, sir. Whatever we can do with respect to the regulatory role we have, and otherwise also we stand by you. On the data and reporting side, I foresee that the ESG Sustain, which I mentioned a while ago, is a consolidated platform that will connect investors, companies, and regulators and institutions. I will therefore request all participants representing different companies today and different institutions, as well as ICAP, to continue actively support this initiative and provide us with their feedback with respect to the data, information, and other, kind of feedback that you would like to have on the ESG Sustain. Lastly, I would conclude that in view of the sustainability and climate change related challenges, the need for collaboration and consolidation of efforts cannot be stressed again. Focused discussions, tangible plans, addressing the key questions, challenges, and some of which I've elaborated also, are essential for a more comprehensive way forward. And I'm hopeful that today we are going to pave a more secure and sustainable future for our generations to come. But as I said, we will probably not be able to address everything today, but it's more of a brainstorming, and it's more of a feedback session. So I would encourage all of you to actively participate in today's session, and I look forward to a more learning experience today, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Jabeen. That was very informative, and I do believe a lot of us learned a lot about the entire initiative of sustainable development and sustainable reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is time for our second keynote speech of the day, and this person is joining us all the way from the UK via Zoom. Now, let us have a brief introduction of Mr. Ravi Abhivardhana. He is the director of ISSB. Now, before he joins us, Mr. Ravi is a chartered accountant with ICAW and is a director of strategic affairs and capacity building at IFRS Foundation. He was previously a technical director at ISSB and led development of the inaugural draft ISSB standard, general requirements IFRS S1, and was involved in the development of climate standard IFRS S2. He was previously the technical director at the Climate Disclosure Standard Board, CDSB, that was consolidated by the IFRS Foundation in February of 2022, having led the CDSB's technical work program to drive uptake of the much better, isn't it? Uptake of the TCFD recommendation and enhanced reporting of environmental and social information globally to investors. Ladies and gentlemen, with a huge round of applause, please welcome all the way from the UK, Mr. Ravi Abhivardhana.
Thank you ever so much for this, and a round of applause for the leadership of Pakistan stakeholders in pushing this agenda forward. And thank you thus far for everything that you've done to support the IFRS Foundation, both from an IFRS accounting perspective, but also most recently with the new ISSB standards. And we really do appreciate the comment letters which you have received, that we have received thus far from you, and we continue to rely upon your very thorough comment letters going forward. So with that brief introduction, over the next few minutes, I'll be taking you through the ISSB standards, more from a strategic perspective, and then leave it to my colleague Mohammed to get into any further detail around IFRS S1 and S2, hopefully just to further lament, where the ISSB had come from and improve the discussions which we look to have during this session about the feasibility of IFRS S1 and IFRS S2. So with that, if we move on to the next slide, what I would like to articulate here is what was already reiterated by the speakers before me, is that the International Sustainability Standards Board forms part of the IFRS Foundation. And ultimately, if we move on to the next slide, it is a package of information which forms part of an investor's ultimate decision making around a company's financial position, financial performance, both historically but also into the future. And why is this the case? Because all the information which is provided via financial statements and sustainability disclosures from an ISSB perspective is to meet the investor demands for high quality information when it comes to an entity. It's important to note that if we move on to the next slide, please. It's important to note that the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, has been created following huge, strong market demand for high quality, comparable data when it comes to sustainability, because before the ISSB, it was very difficult for a preparer to go off and prepare sustainability disclosures, bearing in mind that there were many standards out there. And following the consolidation of many of those standards into the IFRS Foundation during COP26, we've been able to actually produce these standards that provide greater clarity to preparers to ultimately prepare information for investor ingestion. So with that context, and also the support from the G7, G20, and also the IOSCO endorsement, which is a very strong indication of the IFRS S1 and S2 standards, which were published a couple of months ago, and also the Financial Stabilities Board, that there is genuinely a market demand for these standards. So if we move on to the next slide, the ISSB standards really do enhance investor company dialogue all around decision useful information. It shares very much, and also for it to be cost effective as well. And I'll get into the cost effective components in a moment, but but it's important to note that the ISSB had deliberated extensively on the comment letters which we had received on IFRS S1 and S2. We received close to 1,400 comment letters, and following that, we were able to actually finalise our standards a couple of months ago, taking into consideration the cost-effective component to all of this. And if we move on to the next slide, the intention here is that the ISSB standards are to create a global comprehensive baseline of disclosures, in that the ISSB standards will be endorsed and incorporated into jurisdictions, create that common language for comparable decision useful disclosures, ultimately meeting the needs of investors, not only domestically, but also internationally as well, bearing in mind investors are operate from a international perspective. And that global comprehensive baseline allows jurisdictions to build upon this where there are any jurisdictional specific nuances. And just reiterating what I had mentioned earlier, if we move on to the next slide, the ISSB standards really do bring together a wide portfolio of standards, close to 40 years worth of intellectual property into one. So that includes integrated reporting. It includes the industry-based standards from SASB, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board's framework and application guidance when it comes to nature and social issues, as well as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And just reiterating that following the consultation on IFRS S1 and S2, we were able to actually release the thorough due process and thorough re-deliberations at board level. We were in a position to actually release our inaugural standards, IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, on the 26th of June. So with that, I would like to take you into a next phase of work, and possibly, how does this align with Pakistan's priorities and direction of travel, bearing in mind what was mentioned before me. So if we move on to the next slide, this is just a really a bit of a reiteration of what I've articulated before, which is the ISSB standards have been created, they've been endorsed by IOSCO, and they are recommending adoption across its members. One of those members is Pakistan. There's also audit standard setters enhancing, developing assurance standards, and we're working closely with the IAASB with regards to their recent consultation on sustainability standards. We're also working incredibly closely with jurisdictions as well, who are going through the process of adoption. We look to really enhance our relationship with Pakistan as well, and we're here to help you on this journey as well. And this is we're very much encouraging not only adoption but also voluntary application as well, because it can take time for adoption to fully kick in. So in the interim, voluntary adoption could be a very sensible approach to ready companies in a particular jurisdiction to what's coming down the road. I think it's really important, if we move on to the next slide, I think it's particularly important to actually bring to a fore what we heard via the consultations on IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, and the need for those standards to be cost effective. And I'm currently over in Africa at the moment, so I'm not dialing in from London, but I'm dialing in from Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm attending the Africa Climate Week, and I'm also been fortunate to have presented at the Kenyan regulators' recent meeting earlier this week, where they had announced their journey to start adoption. And for this, I also reiterated what I'm going to reiterate here, is that we have built in mechanisms within both IFRS S1 and IFRS S2 to make them proportionate. And what we heard during the actual consultations is the standards are good, but they need to be to speak to emerging markets and developing countries. And to that, we have built in a raft of mechanisms within the actual standards themselves to actually talk to, the different readiness levels of not only developing and emerging markets, but also entities in the global north, for example, because we understood that these are particularly new considerations for companies. And to that, we have many requirements which take into consideration the skills, capabilities, and resources of entities. We use and have lifted a lot of content from IFRS accounting, such as the use of reasonable and supportable information without undue costs. So we're not requiring an entity to boil the ocean on data. All we're asking for is the best available information, which you have to hand. If that's secondary data, that's completely fine. That's what an investor would like to understand, and that's better than not reporting at all. We also have well-known terminology and concepts lifted from IFRS accounting standards as well, such as the materiality approach, and also other terms and concepts as well, such as the useful characteristics of information. And to further reiterate the importance of the need for scalability and proportionality, bearing in mind that this is an international standard that needs to work across the globe, including Pakistan. We have a raft of guidance within the standards, and we have also produced educational materials and sources of guidance to support an entity on this journey, bearing in mind that IFRS S1 does ask for all sustainability related risks and opportunities that are managed at the at an entity level. We're not asking for everything, we're just asking for those risks and opportunities which an entity wants to manage, bearing in mind the possible risks though and opportunities those sustainability matters could have on an entity's future strategy over the short, medium and long term. And I really do implore you all, if you haven't already, to really interact with the standards and get familiar with the range of resources which are there for you to actually go off and apply, bearing in mind the context of these discussions today. And we also have suggested transition reliefs as well, and that's more for jurisdictional guidance. With that, I'll build upon the transition reliefs in the next slide, please. And here we have a raft of first year reliefs. And as I mentioned, these are for it's a jurisdictional guidance. So IFRS S1 requires the disclosure of sustainability related risks and opportunities. So that can include climate, water, biodiversity, whatever is a sustainability related risk or opportunity for an entity. But we understand this can take time for an entity to form an opinion on that and thereby disclose this information, therefore informing investors. So what we've suggested is that an entity can limit disclosures to climate related information, bearing in mind the market traction to date on climate related information. And then also report information later than the annual reports. The intention of IFRS S1 and S2 is to actually report this information alongside the financial statements. Recall what I said on my earlier slides. This is a package of information for an investor, which includes your financial statements and your sustainability related financial information. But we understand that it can take time to get the processes, controls, the actual data in place. And to that, we're suggesting a later reporting for such information. Greenhouse gases, scope 3 disclosures are particularly challenging from what we've heard, and to that we're suggesting a later reporting on scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, and other reliefs as well, including the relief on not requiring to disclose comparative information in the first year. So with that, the next slide very much just talks or just brings it back to the actual supporting materials. So I've spoken about the proportionality mechanisms which are built into the standards themselves to really reflect upon the comments which we received from stakeholders in Pakistan, but also the supporting transition reliefs as well. But I also just want to bring to a fore once again the supporting materials. And this really useful link at the bottom of the website, bottom of this slide, which really should be a source, important source for you as you embark upon this journey, which will bring to a fore the application guidance and educational materials to support effective implementation of the standards, both IFRS S1 and S2. So if you haven't already, and these slides I assume are going to be circulated afterwards, so just an interactive that resource. So with that, if we move on to the next slide, which is my final slide, I've I just want to bring to your attention other capacity building initiatives as well. So I've spoken to about the support and materials, but we also have a capacity building initiative as well. And you can find out further details about that on our website. But the intention is to continue to develop general educational materials for all stakeholders, including investors, and development of specific educational materials for stakeholders in emerging and developing economies, as well as smaller companies who may be outside of the direct remit of IFRS S1 and S2, but because of the trickle-down effect of global corporations, there may be a requirement for an entity, a smaller entity, to actually disclose information to improve the data collection of a listed entity. And we also have some implementation groups as well. So if there are any leaders, sustainability leaders, corporate leaders in Pakistan, I really do implore you to actually apply for the transition implementation group. We want to hear from you. We need to hear from you on what your challenges have been thus far with regards to sustainability implementation, whether it be GRI, TCFD, UN SDGs, or maybe you've already started your journey on the use of TCFD, SASB standards, or maybe you're you've already started the journey on IFRS S1 and S2. We want to hear from you. So there's the possibility of joining that transition implementation group. So yeah, that's me, and that's very much my high-level remarks, and hopefully it's been helpful. I'm very much looking forward to listening in to the discussions that will follow. So thank you.
Allow me to thank Mr. Ravi on behalf of everyone here, especially due to the fact of the time difference. And I believe it is early morning or even before that in the UK, if I'm not wrong. So with that, Mr. Ravi, I'd like to thank you once again for taking out time and speaking to us on the forum of ICAP. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it one more time for Mr. Ravi. And now it is time for our third keynote speech for the day. And for that, I would be calling Mr. Mohammad Imran Khan. Now, Mr. Mohammad Imran is an associate member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. Currently, he's serving as the Director Technical Services at ICAP. He has a rich experience, largely in practicing firms, in audit, assurance, financial and internal controls reviews, and processes. Sound knowledge on application of international financial reporting standards and international standards on auditing. Here to deliver his speech on brief overview of the standards, criteria of application of standards in Pakistan, and associated timing and structure of applicability on companies. With a huge round of applause, please welcome Mr. Mohammad Imran Khan.
First of all, I would like to thank everybody who has joined us in this consultation session. And as already we discussed, that this is also mentioned that I'm going to touch upon some of the concepts in IFRS S1 and S2. And, I'll be giving, highlights of the disclosure requirements contained therein. Yes. So the key concept, behind the introduction of these standards is the previously IFRS accounting standards were providing information about the past transactions. The balance sheet, profit and loss account provided information on the past. But these sustainability standards, require the disclosure of the information that is going to impact the company's future prospects over the short term, medium term, and the long term. So why this information is important? Because this information is important in order to help, the users of the primary users of the information to make the decisions as to providing the resources to the entity. So the entities, so this is why, these standards have been brought in. So the entity's ability to generate the cash flows, depends upon its interactions with the resources, with the entity, with the stakeholders such as government, such as economy, environment, and the resources that it has. So this is, the interactions over the entire value chain. Yes. So the value chain that the entity interacts with the environment, suppliers, society, customers, and the outputs are generated. Those are products, services, carbon emissions, cash flows, profits, cost of capital, etc. So from there emanates the risks and the opportunities. On the future horizon, let's say short term, medium term, and long term, and that impact on the future cash flows and the cost of capital and access to finance. So this is why, because these risks and opportunities impact the future of an entity, so this is why these standards require disclosures. So IFRS S1 requires entity to disclose, information on all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that are expected to affect the entity's, future cash flows, access to finance, and cost of capital over short-term, medium-term, or long-term. So these are the 4 areas of operations of an entity: governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. So the disclosure requirements require us that we talk about, governance, strategy, as to the management of sustainability related resource risk and opportunities, governance process that the entity has followed, for monitoring and managing sustainability related risk and opportunities, the risk management process the entity has installed in its processes in relation to sustainability related risk and opportunities, metrics and targets which an entity is using in order to monitor the progress, and regarding the key indicators, key metrics, key areas of the sustainability related risk and opportunities, whether those are required by as a result of the operations or required by law or regulation. So some of the disclosure requirements are highlighted over here. The materiality concept is same, as regards, IFRS 1, S1 and S2, which was there in the IFRS accounting standards. So we need to determine the materiality in the same manner as we determine the materiality for the in relation to IFRS accounting standards. Material information is required to be disclosed, and the information is required to be disclosed when it is immaterial, when it is required by regulation or law. As regards disclosure topics, climate-related topics are required to be disclosed in the first year of application. The standards require us not to disclose other topics. In the first year, only climate-related disclosures are required. From the second year, relevant industry-related topics, disclosure topics can be included in the reporting. Disclosures are required on the core, areas: governance, strategy, process, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets in relation to sustainability-related risk and opportunities. Comparative information in the first year of reporting, no comparatives are required, and comparatives are required in respect of the preceding period, in the future, and descriptive comparatives are also allowed in order to explain the information. There are requirements in relation to connection of the information presented in the sustainability reports and the information presented in the financial statements. There has to be consistency within the information, items of information presented in the sustainability report. There has to be consistency with respect to information presented as part of, governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and target. And there has to be consistency as regard information presented in the sustainability report and the financial statements. Timing and location, the sustainability reports are to be presented in the same, maybe presented in the same location where the financial statements are presented, maybe presented in the annual report. Either can be part of a management commentary or can be, put in as a separate report, appropriately titled as information on the sustainability. There is one more requirement is to as to the identification of the standards and the guidance which company has applied in the preparation of the sustainability report. The IFRS S1 provides guidance as to how to identify risk, sustainability related risk and opportunities. The standard requires that we have to see what are the requirements as per the relevant sustainability disclosure standard. Then if that guidance is not provided in the IFRS sustainability disclosure standard, then we are required to refer to and consider the applicability of disclosure topics contained in the SASB standards. So these two requirements are mandatory. Besides that, we may refer to other frameworks. We may also refer to the reports prepared by other entities in the same industry or geographical region. How to identify material information matrix about sustainability related risks and opportunities. The standard provides guidance, sources of guidance that we may apply. We are required to apply a specific IFRS disclosure standard that applies to a particular risk or opportunity. In the absence of a specific IFRS disclosure standard, we are required to refer to the SASB standards for particular metrics which relate to a particular industry. Then we may also refer to CDSB framework. We may also refer to the pronouncements by other bodies. We may also refer to the metrics disclosed by other entities which operate in the same industry or region. The second standard is IFRS S2, which relates to climate-related risk and opportunities. It talks about exposure to climate-related risk, plan to mitigate risk, and the opportunities that arise from the climate changes. Some of the key concepts in relation to climate changes are transitional risks and the physical risks and the opportunities. So transitional risks are those risks which arise from transitioning to carbon-free economy or carbon-less economy. So there may be changes in the policy or the regulations which arise the risk. There may be change in the product development or technology which may also raise the risk. So these are the transitional risks. As regards physical risks, climate risks, so these arise from physical events such as cyclone or flood, and there may be chronic physical risks such as rise in the temperatures over time. And there may be opportunities as a result of managing these climate changes. Entities can identify the opportunities for resource efficiencies, energy sources, products and services. There may be changes brought in the development of the products, and this may provide savings to the entities. So core content, these are the core elements of operations of an entity. These are to be discussed as part of disclosure requirements. These are required to be disclosed in the reports as to what is the governance process to manage the climate-related risks and opportunities. What are the strategies that the company has followed to manage climate-related risks and opportunities, and the risk management process that the company has installed in relation to climate-related risks and opportunities, and the metrics and targets the company has set to monitor the progress towards these areas. So this is a chart, that describes as to how this process goes on. I mean, the overall governance process, and there are risks and opportunities, arising from the transitional risk and the physical risk, and there are opportunities arising as a result, because the company is interacting, the company is taking steps in relation to climate changes, and then there arise, opportunities, and that become part of, strategic planning and the risk management process. And yes, this has the financial impact, and this goes on, and this falls into our balance sheet, profit loss account, cash flow statement. So this is a very useful picture to understand as to how this will go. So the important concept in IFRS S2 is climate resilience, on which there are disclosure requirements. Climate resilience is an entity's ability to manage the climate-related risks and opportunities. The entity's ability to adapt itself, in relation to transitional risk and the climate-related physical risk. And there are requirements as to how the entity has got resilience, strategic resilience, and operational resilience in relation to climate-related changes. The disclosure requirements also require us to perform scenario analysis, what if analysis. If, for example, a physical risk matures, a flood arises. So what is how it's going to impact our entity, how it's going to impact the overall the operations of an entity. So we need to determine as to how it's going to impact us, our value chain, and then we have to disclose it in the sustainability report. So this is a pictorial example of what factors one can consider. For example, rise in the temperatures, or the physical hazards, or the transition hazards, and it may impact our risk assessment and our supply chain operations and assets. And this can impact the overall our company, sector, and the country. So these are highlights of the disclosure requirements which are required as per IFRS S2. So information is required on the governance process, on the strategy part, on the risk management part, and on the metrics and targets. Information is required on whether the company has performed scenario analysis and on the related risk and opportunities. And the information is required on the impact assessment as to how the entity has considered the overall risk and considered its impact on the entity's business, entity strategy, and the business model. Climate resilience as to how much the company is climate resilient as regards climate changes, entities, resilience of the entity strategy and the business model to climate changes. And there are most important requirements for the disclosures on the greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And this is going to be a very challenging task for the entities I'm going to discuss in the next slide. So scope 1 emissions are those which arise directly from the company's operations. Scope 2 emissions are those which arise as a result of by the other companies, by the other entities which provide energy, lights, for example, electricity to the company. So as a result of our using the energy, the emissions arise. And scope 3 emissions are those which arise at places of other parties, and which arise directly as a result of our interactions with those entities. So the standard requires us, provides relief in the first year of application from disclosing scope 3 green gas emissions. And the challenge is the entities are required to engage with the stakeholders across its value chain to ensure that there are proper systems and controls in place in order to generate the information which are required to be disclosed, and to achieve scope 3 emission targets in future. Now I'm going to present a draft of the sustainability related information, financial information, which may be used by the companies, and we have developed considering the requirements in the standard and the SASB standard. So as part of the requirements, we are required to disclose climate-related risk and opportunities. So within that, these are the disclosure topics, and with the disclosure topics, there are associated metrics. So SASB standards provide guidance for around 77 industries, as to what disclosure topics can be, and the related metrics associated with those disclosure topics. So this is how the overall information can be presented. Statement of this is a illustrative sustainability statement of sustainability risk and opportunities, showing the climate related changes for a household company, for a household products company. And this is statement of, showing risk and opportunities for other than, considering topics other than climate related. So these are the notes which will become part of the overall statement. So as I discussed earlier, there is a requirement to state as to what standards company has followed in preparation of the sustainability related financial information. So there has to be a statement of compliance showing this. There are requirements for disclosures on governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and targets. There can be commentaries on the regulatory risks as to how, what are the risks and how those risks are being managed, market risks, physical environmental risks, innovative products and service opportunities, and the resource efficiencies and the market opportunities. There are requirements as to the impact over the future, over the short term, medium term, and long term. So this is how, information can be presented. And there are requirements as regards, climate related metrics and targets, and which company can, respond to in this manner. Now I'm going to discuss proposed criteria for applicability for companies. So the criteria has been developed, using a phased approach. So this approach we have considered, we have, debated, and we have discussed, and we have, while developing this criteria, we have, considered the size of the companies. So in the first phase, the companies, which are very significant large size companies, having turnover greater than 25 billion, for the last 22 consecutive financial years, can be brought into the applicability criteria. And the companies, which have employees greater than 1,000 number and total assets greater than 12.5 billion. So the application can be made from 1st January 2024. It means that they will be presenting their reports, somewhere in 2025. So as mentioned earlier, see there in the first reporting there is a leeway, there is a room for first reporting to be made within 9 months from the reporting date. Phase 2, within the phase 2, the companies, which have turnover greater than 12.5 billion, means lower than 25 billion, and the employees, they have employees between 500 to 1,000, and the total assets greater than 6.25 billion, but less than 12.5 billion, they can be brought in to the applicability net, and they are required to report on the sustainability with effect from, let's say, reporting period ended on December 31, 2025. So after that, in the third phase, what we have proposed is what we have proposed is the listed companies which are not falling within this criteria are required to follow these standards. So in the third phase, which is for the periods beginning on or after January 1, 2025, the listed companies which have not been into the phase 1 and phase 2 shall be brought into the applicability net. And the first reporting, as I said, can be made within 9 months from the close of the financial year. In the first reporting, only disclosures with respect to climate-related disclosures are required, and climate-related disclosures scope 3 emissions are required, not required in the first year, but in the second year. And what we're proposing is the insurance reporting on the sustainability reports, can be made from the second year of reporting, not from the first year, but from the second year, so as to allow, so as to give room to the companies to prepare, have proper systems in place, proper information in place, generated from the systems, so that, it can be auditable, it can be verified in case, so that the insurance report can be made. Now, may I invite the participants, to raise the questions or any comments, as to what we have discussed today as regards, applicability criteria. Yes. So, yes, may I invite now to the panel members? Yeah, Mr. Farooq Saab. Yes, Farooq Saab, can you please join us? Just 2 minutes. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Imran Khan, for this very interesting and knowledgeable presentation that you gave. Yes, please, round of applause. How can we forget that? And now, before we move towards the panel discussion, apologies, Mr. Farooq, we are going to rearrange the seats a little bit. And before that, we're going to play a little video up here, a promotional event that we're about to have from the SRC. So I'm not going to tell you anything about it, so let's just play the video. Talha, please. So I wonder what that could be. That is apparently a cricket tournament being organized by ICAP later in November. And if you're interested, you can reach out to us and have your team registered as well. Now, with that said, since we still have a few more things left, I have a microphone in my hand. And with that, if this thing's on, yes, I'd like to come down to the audience and interact with you a bit until this is done. So, are you all enjoying the session so far? Yes. Is there any questions or feedbacks or anything that you'd like to say? Because we do have a panel discussion later on. But before that, any feedback? How do you feel? Anyone at all? This is your chance to speak. There you go. Do you want to say something? We have a volunteer. Okay, if we could, Sami, if we could turn that down or turn that up a little. Do we have any suggestions or yes?
My comment is related to the criteria of application. There are 2 points which I like to make. One is there are 3 factors, and there's the order of any line can make it applicable. So my view is they should be at meeting the 2 out of those 3, then the required to apply standards rather than a single line. Because the normal the case in world single line does not just come up clear that the companies have taken from can. That should be based on any 2 of this is one. Second thing is this identifying mining and disclosure. Is required system, and the applicability right for period starting from 1st January 2024 will be 2. So I believe it has to be more reasonable time, and that's
And so you are? And you are, sir? What is your name? Yes, Makbul Saab. I am new, so apparently I get to learn new names. Thank you, Mr. Makbul. So if we are done with the preparations, I would like to call one by one, of course, Mr. Farooq Saab up on stage. Let us have a round of applause for Mr. Farooq. And next, I'd like to call Vice President of ICAP, Mr. Arsalan Khalid, up on stage. Mr. Arsalan he's left, apparently. No, not to worry. Next, we have Syed Fahim Hassan, partner, AFF and co-chartered accountants. Please welcome him with a huge round of applause. And of course, Mr. Muhammad Imran Khan. Let's welcome him one more time up on stage. And lastly, I'd like to request one more time to Ms. Musarrat Jabin to please join us for the panel. Please welcome her up on stage one more time. And the flow of this panel is not going to be questions and answer and moderator. It's going to be, if anyone from the audience has a question, feel free to ask as many questions as you can from our esteemed panelists. Now, the mic would be, there's one mic here, there's one mic at the back as well.
Right. Thank you, Babar, for all the arrangement. So we are done with all our speeches, all our presentations. अब time है आप लोगों का. जो अभी presentation की है इमरान ने, इसमें ये एक discussion को generate करने के लिए जो applicable criteria है वो बताया है, and then the illustrative. So you have something in front of you, so where we can start. What we need to understand here is that the standards have already come. And I say that sustainability reporting is not coming, it has arrived. So once we have these standards, whether the standard is good, whether the requirements need to change or not, the standard is already issued, so it's given. Now, what we need to see is in terms of how we are going to take this forward, how we are going to implement this, first adopt and implement. So many challenges will be there. There will be comments, and along the way, we will ourselves, because this is all new for all of us, we all are learning in the process. We'll be understanding from you, from your perspective, your challenges, and based on that, all such recommendations we'll be debating at a forum, and then we will try and respond to you. Our approach is to facilitate and achieve this objective for the good of all the companies, for the society, for everyone. So in that context, this has been presented. So let me start by first requesting, Mr. You said that you also have a question. So let me trigger first from you to kick off our discussion.
So I did mention some of those questions in my keynote speech as well, which was basically around, the implementation timelines. And of course, whether we were already prepared for it and we have the required resources and the capacity to actually have these standards implemented. So as Imran explained in his presentation also, it has to be, and as suggested by him, it has to be a phased process. And, it was just an example, perhaps. We don't have hard and fast. We're not very hard and fast on the size of the company and the turnover. And, so it was something which has been presented in terms of the possible way forward and the phased approach that which ICAP could adopt, in fact, with respect to the implementation of these two standards. So iske hawale se agar, we can perhaps explain, as in Makbul Saab had his concern also with respect to the implementation timelines. So how many of us would feel that, the proposed timelines and the criteria suggested would be okay to go with? Or if we think that we need to, have a larger timeline, that was going to be something very comfortably achieved. But as Farooq Saab also said, that the standards are there and they need to be implemented. We can't give a very long timeline of, for years or years.
So this would be the first question, which should actually my side and also perhaps the to the participants if they have their feedback on this one.
Right. So in that respect, I have been interacting with many people, and I have this understanding that without these standards being there, already companies do publish their sustainability reports. They are already working towards having, if they are not already publishing, they intend to publish in future as well. So the idea here is to have this phased approach to first focus on very large entities. Now, there could be a discussion, there could be different of views about how do we define the very large companies. So on our part, what the technical department is doing is that we are analyzing that if we take as proposed 25 billion considered to be very large entities, then how many companies will fall into this? So we are working towards that, but this is the first, trigger point that in phase one, very large companies, and those very large companies are only going to present their report on climate without any comparatives and without scope 3. So the standard has given the effective date of January 1, 2024, and the report can come out after the 9 months. That means by September 2025, the companies can report on that. So the climate-related disclosures are already, you don't need to produce to start with the SASB standards, which is for other than climate. For climate, S2 has given the disclosures. ये चीज बहुत क्लैरिटी से बताना चाह रहा हूं कि industry by industry, and there are 77 industry classifications, जिसमें आपकी कोई भी एंटिटी जो है वो जब उस स्टैंडर्ड में जाएगी वहां इंडस्ट्री की डिस्क्रिप्शन दी हुई है. सो अगर कोई कंफ्यूजन है कि जी क्या मैं इस सेक्टर में हूं या उस सेक्टर में हूं, वो एम्पली क्लैरिफाई हुई भी है उस इंडस्ट्री डिस्क्रिप्शन में. When you will go into that standard, you will open that. So suppose you are in textile, तो वहां जो वो है वो apparel and clothing और इस तरह करके उसकी nomenclature है. जब आप उसमें देखेंगे तो वो textile will fall into that. आप वो textile का यानी जो स्टैंडर्ड का पार्ट है उसको जब आप ओपन करेंगे उसमें specific disclosures are given, right? So for first reporting, since I mentioned textile, for textile, for climate reporting, the first item is priority raw material. You need to identify what are your priority raw material, and in relation to that, जो climate related specific information है वो वहाँ already दी हुई है. It's already given, right? And there is further explanation of every item and every concept. So it is already given. We just need to go and read that. And let me tell you that all of that information is business oriented, right? So the people who are running the textiles, the people who are at right places within that organization, they already understand that. It is not something that is new, that is already happening on ground, right? So I'm just giving you the thought process that how we have come to, a very large entity already thinking about sustainability report. The guidance is already clear, given. We need to apply it. Yes, there will be challenges, and those challenges, I'm sure every such industry will come forward with that. This is one of the challenges that we have. What I would expect the challenge, even from the very large companies, would be that climate scenario analysis that may require some complexity. So, of course, there will be more questions coming, but I just wanted to give you the perspective that how we are thinking about and recommending for very large entities to start first, and then finally we stop at the listed companies, which is the phase 4, that even smaller companies are not going beyond that. So that is the thinking. Ji Salman.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Salman from International Industries Limited. I agree that the timeline is sufficient provided we can make clusters or focus groups of industries and educate them in the next span of 1 or 1.5 years on how to implement these standards, because we are not the first country to implement these things. We would have international resources to do that. But my particular question is, since these disclosures are more relevant to the industry, these are the lifeblood of an organization. These are not just usual IFRS 9 standards which shareholders perceive to be an accountant's gimmick, where these are standards whether the company makes profit or loss, you have to make certain disclosures and are perceived as more of a compulsory legal requirement. These are the standards that affect the organization's business and future prospects. So are we looking for a statutory position in every company so that every company religiously follows these sustainability standards and serves as a good corporate citizen in spite of just being compliant with disclosure standards? Thank you.
Right, Salman. So we need to understand that these standards are equivalent to IFRS accounting standards. So when you prepare your financial statement, you make a statement of compliance that we have prepared these financial statements in accordance with IFRS. Same here. So when you prepare this report, you have to make this statement, the statement of compliance, that this report is prepared in accordance with IFRS sustainability standard. Now, once you make that statement, whatever disclosures are required in terms of those standards, then you need to comply. So this will eventually become, if those are mandated, of course, my mandate can only come from SCCP. So once those are mandated, and for the type of companies that eventually SCCP decides to give that mandate, so those will have to apply those standards. However, if there are companies which are not following or have no mandated requirement to have, and if they want to publish a sustainability report voluntarily, then what we will do is, as we have done for a financial statement, we have a TR5 which says that you have to follow certain framework. So there we can issue some guidance that for those where it is not mandated, then if you want to publish a sustainability report voluntarily, then use IFRS standards. So this could be one of the suggestions that we will be putting forward to SCCP, but of course, subject to the comments and discussions we will have at the forums.
Just to add to it, Salman, of course, while I completely agree with what Farooq Saab said with respect to its applicability, I think what you were probably alluding at was, if it becomes a regulatory requirement or a statutory requirement, would there be a penalty provision for those who are not compliant or who do not do it, diligently? So of course, that would be phase 2. Once, this is made mandatory through a regulatory act, that's going to be, then there are certain provisions attached to it. But as I said, initially, it's going to be something which we, would rather prefer initially, was through a set of guidelines, creating some kind of environment first, and then going towards and moving towards the mandatory provision of it. But as Farooq Saab said, since they are very close and related to the IFRS, jo aapki typical, accounting standards hain, So this is going to be in compliance with those standards which ISSB has issued or any other standards. Because I think Farooq Saab, the point was that if, the standard 1 and 2, usme if they are using, as Imran also explained in his presentation, certain other climate related standards, so that probably needs to be disclosed that they have used these benchmarks for it and matrices for it.
Yes, I think as far as the climate standard is concerned, what Imran mentioned about other framework is there is when you disclose scope 1, scope 2 emissions, right, scope 3 emissions, there is a way of calculation. So there is an underlying standard issued which S2 has referred to and has mandated. What the standard has said that for year 1, if you are already disclosing on certain other parameters, certain other way of calculation, which is happening. Actually, this is an issue with China. In China, they are not using the standard, the GHG corporate accounting protocol that has been mentioned. So there was a big dispute or a disagreement on that. So probably what they have come out with is to defer it for 1 year, but then you have to come back to the accounting protocol standard that. So the way you have calculated it, that standard requires to disclose in terms of S2. So that is what Imran has referred to. Ji Makbul Sahab.
बजट की बात की है जहाँ अप्लाई नहीं होता तो अप्रोच शुड बी लाइक IS 34 इसलिए कि अगर वॉलंटरली इंटरम अकाउंट बनाना चाहते हैं तो उनको रोका नहीं जाता लेकिन वो ये नहीं कह सकते कि एज पर IS 34 है तो लिहाजा जो लोग थोड़ा बहुत डिस्क्लोजर देना चाहते हैं तो हमें ये नहीं कहना कि तुमने S1 S2 फॉलो ही करना है हमें ये कहेंगे कि आपने ये नहीं कहना कंप्लायंस में कि आपने S1 S2 फॉलो किया तो people will know that this is something on different basis, different metric. That's what my opinion.
जी, थैंक यू मकबूल साहब. इसमें मैं थोड़ा सा क्लैरिफाई कर दूं कि those who are aware that presently जो sustainability reports issue हो रही है, how those are issued. If you go through those, in many of those reports, and I think Fahim can further add into that, because from ICAP forum we do sustainability awards as well. So it is reviewed and Fahim is part of that review. So when you see those reports, in many of such reports, there is no mention of a particular framework that they have adopted. So I'm not criticizing it, but what I'm saying is that it becomes sometimes a marketing document of their entity. And internationally, there is a big debate that there should be some kind of a panel action by respective jurisdiction. There should not be greenwashing. So because of that reason, to have whenever if anybody issues a sustainability report in Pakistan, they should mention a proper framework that this is what we have followed, so that it should not become, the purpose is not really a marketing, it's the sustainability. So that is the point.
Assalamu alaikum. So this is Haris from Unilever.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's quite comforting to hear from Musarat in terms of the work being done by the regulator, and we are expecting some good guidance from the regulator in the times to come. So I have a question specifically to a specific disclosure requirement, which is in terms of the resilience testing we have in the climate related disclosures, where it actually requires us to, do some scenario analysis around the different factors that would be impacting the organizations. So in terms of the impact, it's our judgment versus another company's judgment in terms of the implication that would have on the financial statements or probably on the business or at large on the business model of the company. So should we be expecting any guidance from the regulator or from the ICAP as the standard setter in terms of the, the calculation methodology that the company should be adopting while forecasting the implications that we should be foreseeing through the climate related factors that are going to change over the period? So yeah, on this particular thing, and in terms taking from this particular element of the scenario analysis, there are multiple disclosures which requires the complex calculation across the standards. So since this is a new topic for all of us, or probably globally, we have been in touch with our global offices as well. They are also, formulating the methodologies in terms of the calculation. So how are we going to implement these standards in Pakistan in terms of, are we going to give some transitional reliefs beyond what is actually currently being offered by the ISSB right now? So what's our approach for Pakistan specifically in terms of adoption? Is it going to be the phase, or is it going to be the similar that's been proposed by the ISSB right now? Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good question. You see, this climate-related particular disclosure that you're referring to, the climate, that's under resilience, and then you have to do the scenario analysis. This is a complex topic. And what I have observed is that around the world, there are certain models developed, there are certain tools, and there's some very specific consulting activity by those who have developed those models. And those models are not very generic, like you have for everywhere. It is location specific. You have to see. So if you have a factory in a particular city, then that has to be in the context of that, in your context and in that physical location. So of course that requires some effort, some work, and some analysis to be done, taking into account the relevant expertise in that field, and you need some technical help on that as well. So yes, this is a complex area. The standard gives you certain disclosures that are required to be made. Probably it will take some time, but to say that it is not possible or it is not, because this is already being done. If you have heard the name TCFD, this whole standard is on the structure of the TCFD. For TCFD, for a number of years around the world, companies have been reporting. So there are precedences how those reports and what disclosures are given. So as we speak, since I am not aware of the particular difficulties for any set of industry or any set of companies, of course, then when it will come to us, you are also part of the working group as well. So give us that very specific difficulty. And of course, if there will be implementation problem, yes, the implementation relief can be recommended. No two views on that.
From our experiences as well. So there
Yes.
would definitely be some kind of, guides with respect to the frequently asked questions. So the experiences, your experiences could be similar to any other, company in the similar sector. So they can be jotted down and, again, made available publicly so that others could refer to.
Salam, you want?
I think I just wanted to add, I think because we are talking about the implementation approach of the standards in Pakistan. So I think part and parcel of any implementation, because the stakeholders are not only basically the technical people who have to play a role in implementing the standards like ICAP, but also the governance is a first step. So the companies that we are aiming to implement these standards in the first wave, what sort of governance structure and the emphasis they have within those companies on the ESG, from a policy side, from upskilling their own people, from investing into the ESG initiative. Because I think where SECP also, I think, can consider maybe a broad-based approach that we have like CCG regulations. So it should be CCG plus ESG regulations, which provide a framework for any company to provide a governance focus to the ESG initiative, plus also certain guidelines in order for the companies to set up their ESG framework. Like, they should have trained resources on the ESG. They may have a specific committee of the board looking at the ESG policy. There has to be a readiness or materiality assessment at particular point in time before they embark on a broader based journey. So those guidelines or that the company can consider at the board level to start their or structure their roadmap, that will help the implementation to receive the required focus in the first stage. So it's not like a standard getting implemented and then the consultants and the auditors and the companies at the I would say at the middle management level struggling to get that standard right. It has to receive that kind of a focus from the board and the investment that it demands, right? Because we are aiming to, and I think it's a logical approach to go for a larger companies with larger impact or potential impact on the economy. But to have some guidelines and framework for the board and to govern that whole process. And as part of that process, the standards get also implemented and adopted by the company, rather than standards driving the whole ESG initiative. Otherwise, what will happen is that maybe you will achieve a disclosure, but what's the outcome of the disclosure? Whether the disclosure is providing a better picture about the company, or it's more exposing the company with the negativity from the stakeholders or investors. So that's, I think we need to also think more broadly around this.
Very well said.
Assalamualaikum.
I
I am Daniel from EFU General Insurance. Sir, basically मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि हमारा इंश्योरेंस इंडस्ट्री है, उसका जो वर्किंग प्रिंसिपल या मॉडल बिल्कुल डिफरेंट है बाकी इंडस्ट्री से. हमारे जो स्टेक होल्डर्स हैं बिल्कुल डिफरेंट हैं, हमारे री इंश्योरर्स हैं, हमारे वेरियस मल्टीपल क्लाइंट्स होते हैं. हर क्लाइंट का जो वर्किंग प्रिंसिपल है या उसका जो बिजनेस है वो बहुत से क्लाइंट्स का वो नॉन इन्वायरमेंटल फ्रेंडली बिजनेस में काम कर रहे होते हैं, जैसे कि कोल फायर्ड पावर प्लांट्स हैं. तो इस सिनेरियो के अंदर जो स्कोप 3 एनालिसिस तो हमारे लिए बहुत डिफिकल्ट या बहुत चैलेंजिंग हो जाए. स्कोप 2 भी चैलेंजिंग होगा क्योंकि वेरियस मल्टीपल क्लाइंट्स हैं हमारे जो नॉन इन्वायरमेंटल फ्रेंडली बिजनेस में काम कर रहे हैं. सेकेंडली जो PML कैलकुलेशंस, लॉस एक्सपोजर्स, कैटास्ट्रॉफिक मॉडलिंग जो हमें अपने क्लाइंट्स के लॉसेस के बेसिकली जो हमारा एक्सपोजर है उसको हमने करने के लिए, सस्टेनेबिलिटी को चेक करने के लिए, उसमें भी हमें बहुत ज़्यादा टेक्निकल स्किल्स की रिक्वायरमेंट है और बहुत टेक्निकल लोगों की ज़रूरत है. और मार्केट में हमारे पास बहुत इस टाइम पे स्किल गैप है. तो जो टाइमलाइन जो एप्लीकेशन की जो टाइमलाइन है वो फॉर इंश्योरेंस सेक्टर मेरा पर्सनल ओपिनियन है कि जो है ये काफ़ी शॉर्ट. सेकेंडली जो इंश्योरेंस के लिए IAP हमारी एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है जो इंश्योरेंस की रेगुलेशंस को उसको देख रही होती है, तो उसके साथ कोलैबोरेशन ICAP का अगर हो तो एक अच्छी एक रेगुलेटरी जो इंश्योरेंस सेक्टर के लिए जो है जो वे फॉरवर्ड जो है अच्छा एक प्रोड्यूस हो सकता है. सेकेंड, मैम ने अपने की नोट में कहा कि ESG डैशबोर्ड एक जो है अंडर कंस्ट्रक्शन है, तो उस डैशबोर्ड में बेसिकली क्या चीजें अवेलेबल होंगी फॉर द गाइडलाइन ऑफ इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज, या हम उससे क्या डैशबोर्ड से हम लोग जो है अचीव कर सकते होंगे. थैंक यू.
Start off with the last one addressed to me. उसमें देखिए मैंने थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लेन किया था कि this is going to be a more of a electronic repository, a centralized one, जिसमें हर किस्म की information that the regulators could use, the companies would feed in their data in terms of their जो उनकी risks हैं, उनकी जो achievements हैं. But as rightly pointed out by Farooq Saab earlier as well, it has to be something which does not fall in that greenwashing one. So it has to be supported कि जी इसमें कौन से आपने standards को follow करके वो calculations किए हैं. So it will be a complete repository जिसमें आपके rules, regulation, if there are statutes, the standards themselves, the explanatory notes to the standards, the information coming from the companies, वो सारी हम कोशिश करेंगे कि एक जगह feed करना. So it would be easy. I mean, it's not a big challenge for us to set up a repository, but feeding it continuously and updating it and making sure that the information contained therein is at least to a certain extent reliable. Because शुरू में हमने भी ये सोचा था कि इसमें अगर information आएगी और भी tag और stamp SECP, तो people would think that information contained in it that is coming from different companies is authentic. So we would not be taking the responsibility of that information. There will be a disclaimer, but it would be all, self-encompassing kind of a software solution, which will have all of it.
Right. On your insurance industry specific questions, certainly I will coordinate with IAP and we will come to IAP specifically and will address for all the insurance sector. We'll align and we'll communicate on that. Broadly speaking, for any disclosures, it is not about that the standard says that you cannot give to those who are non-environmental, there's a negativity around that. It is about the disclosure of the information where that very company is involved. So if you go and see again the climate specific disclosure relating to insurance, because there is a separate disclosure matrices, disclosure topic, background explanation about insurance only. It's about 10 pages and you can go and see that. So your understanding will enhance by reading those. And it is, as I said, not something that you cannot do that. It is your choice, your business, how that insurance company is doing. So as the financial statements reflect the transaction that you carry out, same goes for the sustainability report, whatever, and whichever customer you are dealing with. And if that is required to be disclosed, certain information, you will be required to disclose that once the standard gets applicable. As far as the size of that is, I think that is again a matter of discussion. There are comments coming that you need to further enhance that 25 billion benchmark. So as the comments will come, it will be deliberated. And finally, as I said, we will, with consensus, make some recommendation to SSCP.
जी अस्सलाम
Second, मैं सिर्फ इसमें एक चीज सिर्फ ऐड करना चाह रही थी कि सर the which actually you also mentioned was with respect to the impact of the companies. अगर वो mid-tier companies भी हैं but have a larger impact and they do not fall in that 25 billion turnover requirement or assets, maybe that needs to be reviewed as well.
Yeah, I think I remember I think UK when it started, so they identified certain high impact industries given the environmental. So if you are into those industries, you have to disclose certain climate related disclosures. Unless you come and disclose that there is no impact, which should be rare. So I think from an industry perspective, I think that's also a kind of a I would say an approach to think about those industries which have a high impact on environment, and the threshold of turnover may be lower on those industries as compared to the general.
So, just let me clarify that one of the most significant development other than S1, S2 has been the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that has been issued in EU. And that has mandated sustainability reporting for more than 50,000 companies. And the criteria that they have used is also exactly on the similar lines that we are posing. So there's no distinction about any specific industry. But of course, this is a matter of discussion. We'll take this forward.
25 billion, I think at that time you worked out was $100 million, but now it has gone to 30 billion.
So that's a debate that we can continue.
जी अस्सलाम शमीम बुखारी from National Bank of Pakistan. मेरे ख्याल में आप जो भी क्राइटेरिया सेट करेंगे बैंक्स उसमें आएंगे और तकरीबन सारे बैंक्स आएंगे. So as already suggested by I think Salman, we should have more like communication on this topic. This is a huge topic. We cannot conclude this or have a complete understanding in 1 or 2 sessions. So I second to his opinion, suggestion that we should have more industry specific or like segment specific communication or task force small groups. Second, Madam there's a task force of PSX and State Bank ने भी एक ESR framework PSX issue किया है. So as a regulator, how ICAP and for example ICAP, SCCB and State Bank of Pakistan, they are talking to each other on on these subjects. Because जैसा भी असलान साहब ने कहा है, I think we may have to reverse the order. It should not be ESG. Maybe we should bring the governance first. It should all be governance driven. The objective is not just the disclosures. So governance की side से मैडम अगर कुछ बता सकेंगे उस एंगल से आप क्या सोच रहे हैं? What's your thoughts on that?
Even today, the Code of Corporate Governance, you would recall, which is there for the listed companies, that puts the onus on the boards of directors of the listed companies कि उन्होंने ESG reportings करनी है. जो risks वगैरह है उनको identify करना है. So governance aspect relatively, in my view, is addressed, but with respect to now these disclosures, of course, it needs to be much more enhanced. And we as a regulator have to also see, as I had mentioned earlier, we would like to be coming up with one is the disclosure guide and then followed by a regulatory guide. PSX itself, we don't have a representative from PSX today, unfortunately, but PSX, no, so he is PICG. So Mimosha is going to explain on PICG maybe, but PSX is also working closely with us and we are designing a more of a regulatory, guideline for that. तो वो जो हमारा governance का होगा, putting the onus on the companies, on the management, that is going to definitely come in. And yes, we are coordinating quite, regularly with the State Bank also and with PICG. Memosh, if you would have any comments, वो आपको बताएंगे. But yes, the governance side के ऊपर बहुत काम हो रहा है और होगा भी. But with respect to, of course, the criteria, that's something debatable, as I also started off initially, maybe we will not be able to decide on things today. It's only to discuss, get your feedback, and then, improve on, the possible proposals. Hai.
Right. I wish you want to add something. Mike,
okay, sorry, I have a question. Tahir, National Bank.
Yes,
are we expecting a State Bank circular for adoption of these accounting standards?
Okay, स्टेट बैंक से तो अभी स्पेसिफिकली के वो इसका कोई सर्कुलर इशू करेंगे, ये एक मैटर ऑफ डिस्कशन होगा. बट उन्होंने ESRM तो ऑलरेडी इशू कर दिया हुआ है और वो 3 साल के अंदर उसने होना है और वो बड़ा उसका डीप डाउन इम्पैक्ट है, बिकॉज आगे जितने भी इंडस्ट्रीज हैं दे हैव टू स्टार्ट, वो लिंक होगा. बट क्योंकि जो स्टैंडर्ड्स की अडॉप्शन होती है वो SSCP की तरफ से होती है, सो जो भी स्टैंडर्ड के बारे में कोई चीज आएगी अडॉप्शन, इवन IFRS 9 की फंडामेंटल अडॉप्शन SSCP से होती है, जो कि स्टेट बैंक पे कहता है कि उसको रोक दिया है, 1 साल बाद करेंगे. सो दैट इज द स्ट्रक्चर दैट will be followed here as well.
Banks are in a peculiar situation, being listed companies also. And otherwise also the corporate sector, I mean, which includes the banks or non-banks, all these giants which are in the corporate sector. So that would basically be coming from the SECP.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Shahzad here from Unilever. And this is a question more on the assurance side of things. And I'm going to pick on the example that my colleague just shared, climate scenario analysis, for example. Whatever toolkit an entity uses, a similar entity in the same sector may arrive at a very divergent conclusion basis that. And they may continue to report on the risks and opportunities using the same toolkit basis the results that they've derived from. What kind of assurance practice would then ensure that while divergent, but these are reaching almost the necessary conclusions that the investor wants to draw from it? So उस पर थोड़ी सी अगर वजाहत हो जाए. ये सिर्फ एग्जाम्पल है, क्लाइमेट सिनेरियो एनालिसिस, ऐसी और भी सब्जेक्टिव एलिमेंट्स हैं स्टैंडर्ड्स के अंदर. सो उस पर अगर थोड़ी सी बात करें.
देखिए, इसमें अगर आप अकाउंटिंग साइड से भी समझते हो तो IAS 1 जो होता है ना, IAS 1 के अंदर तमाम प्रेजेंटेशन के कॉन्सेप्ट्स जो हैं वो एलोबरेट हुए हैं. सो S1 के अंदर भी एग्जैक्टली सेम कॉन्सेप्ट्स जो हैं वो दिए हुए हैं. सो वन ऑफ द कॉन्सेप्ट हियर इज एस्टिमेट्स एंड जजमेंट्स. सो on a particular matter, even now from accounting perspective, एक कंपनी को फेयर वैल्यू बनानी है तो फेयर वैल्यू के लिए एक सेट ऑफ पीपल में अराइव एट slightly different value and एक set of people may arrive at another value. But here the point is that those estimates and judgments needs to be expressive if those are critical in nature. Here also what I expect is that whichever company will do this particular analysis, they will be expressive because the standard require it to be expressive about the estimates and judgments used in that context. So let's say there is a similar company in a similar area and they have done 2 different analysis, then they will come out with their estimates and judgments, their basis that will be expressive. So in that context, if both are supportable, the assurance will follow according to that. But this is again going to be a learning. So we will learn from those experiences. And of course, if there is any guidance need to be issued for everyone, that no, not everyone has to use their own assumptions. You have to go with certain set of boundaries. Then of course, institute will play its role.
Acha, this is obviously a very complex area, climate scenario analysis. And my take on that is that it requires a lot of time and efforts and a lot of technical input. And probably companies in Pakistan will have to struggle a lot. And maybe one of the ways could be to see when and how this can be achieved in a meaningful manner, not pressing on the timeline as to, for this particular aspect of scenario analysis, that has to be met in this particular year. Maybe we can consider, and depending on this, on the information available with the entities, the regulators can consider deferring this part for the time being, to make it easier for the companies to be able to actually do a meaningful scenario analysis. Because a lot of data has to be a macro level data. There has to be data used for the geographics of a particular territory. So whether we have that data available in Pakistan, all the different regions have different climatic conditions. If you are operating in Sindh, there are different climatic conditions, Punjab, NWFP, and all the rest. So I'm sure data would be there, but having a structured data available to the masses like companies, and to use that as an input to churn out a meaningful scenario analysis would definitely require certain input from the regulators also, because Ministry of Climate Change has to be there. Other ministries have to be to interact, to be able to provide that data, and then the data has to be obviously reliable, and obviously whoever is using it, they will come up with their strategy, their business plan would be affected by that scenario analysis. So you would not like to use a data which is not reliable. So I think this particular aspect and assurance is again is an uphill task, because there could be certain universal frameworks available for broader areas for approach and things, but then there would be nitty-gritties. There would be a lot of data coming right from the entity or right from that particular territory. So, and then the judgments, and as mentioned by Farooq, judgments, assumptions, and so it's a combination of all this. So it's not that simple.
I think first thing I just wanted to add is that from an assurance point of view, there is a new standard which is developed by ICAP, and by the end of this year, the new standard will be issued for specifically on assurance on ESG related disclosures. And one angle that we also need to consider is that while we adopt the standards on reporting, what should be our approach on the assurance standards or assurance on the whatever gets reported ultimately? Because I think if you have companies reporting and without any assurance, then obviously the credibility of that reporting and their compliance level becomes questionable. And when you have both requirements going hand in hand, I think it has its own advantages, even from an implementation point of view, because then the assurance providers are involved from the very start of the process. Because once you are settled, a company is settled into the process and started reporting, then there is a certain level of bias with whatever has already been reported. And then the assurance provider comes in after 2 years, then it will be a different kind of a struggle.
Right, it's not as issue.
Yeah, just wanted to add that in terms of the scenario analysis, the discussion that has been going on, the Ministry of Climate Change is working on a risk, a very detailed risk sort of profile for Pakistan. And I think that would be a very good base for companies to start off with. They're doing it with the GIZ, and they've gone into a lot of detail with it. So we'll have some sort of data on it soon. The other thing is, I know we're discussing whether we should delay or not. I would recommend is whether we have this option of comply or explain. So whether companies are able, if companies are not able to do something, they explain why are they not able to do this, and when they foresee that they would be able to perform this task, especially related to the S2. If we get a lot of companies who are confused at the end of this, when the, obviously the standards and, these things come out. So that's an option that I would like to suggest.
Right, Nazish. We will further discuss. I think I need to take more information on what Ministry of Climate is doing. So we'll interact on that.
So
Comply or, sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Comply or explain is already part of the standard. So if you are not giving certain disclosures, you need to explain why. So to some extent, it's already there, but definitely there can be guidance further on that.
I just want to add that.
So I have two follow-up questions.
Yes,
First,
sorry.
would that 25 billion limit apply on consolidated financials as well? Because an entity may have 100 billion rupee turnover, but a subsidiary, listed subsidiary in that case, may not have a 25 billion first. The second question which I asked which is basically a follow-up question is, what I have seen in industry is accurate financial reporting is the responsibility of CFO. For governance, risk and compliance, we have company secretary. For internal controls, we have head of internal audit. Is there a need to have a chief sustainability officer so that these standards are implemented in a proper manner, and the ICAP or SECP can guide specific individuals from every industry for better implementation? Thank you.
ये होगा कि I would perceive it to be companies would say that is increasing our cost, and we need to hire additional resources. But if they can designate one of their existing ones as looking into the sustainability as well, so that is possible, definitely.
Okay, so I think on governance, my take is slightly different. On ESG and on sustainability, when we talk about governance, it is the governance of the sustainability itself. Okay, now governance of sustainability it starts from the board, and it goes all the way down to the processes and controls and procedures. So when we talk about governance, it's not only the board of directors or a committee underneath, but it includes all the paraphernalia which we have within the organization, which includes all the controls and processes and procedures. So having a meaningful governance within an organization, you cannot achieve without a specialist on board. Not only on board, like on the board of directors and the committee itself, because you have to have a committee under the board of directors looking after this particular aspect, depending on your footprint. So if you have a higher environmental footprint, then you probably must have somebody on the board also. If you don't have that much footprint, then maybe you have a committee, and then committee must have a sustainability specialist within that. You call it CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer. Now, you initially spoke about the reporting. Who is the owner of the reporting? So it has to be a collaborative effort of your reporting team, which is the finance team, and your sustainability team. So only sustainability team cannot make out a report. Okay, so because we, as the finance team is more conversant with the reporting aspects, so therefore ICAP and all the rest, all the accountants are also part of the debate that how to report and what to report. But the activities have to be conducted by the sustainability team. So if there are activities, obviously, then there would be reporting. So I think it has to be a joint effort, and it has to be an effort across the organization. Meeting your goals and targets it can never be achieved if you just make one person responsible for it. So it has to be the entity-wide efforts to ensure that sustainability targets are met, and reporting is a joint effort.
Okay. I think Mr. Ravi wants to add something. Ravi, over to you.
Thank you. Really insightful discussions. I just wanted to come in on 2 points, in fact, and this is concerning, the first point is concerning scenario analysis. I think that's come up quite on a few occasions now. Within the standards, in fact, when we were re-deliberating upon the standards, we tried to build in proportionality mechanisms to actually address some of these matters. So we do require, based upon a company's size, competence, and other matters, for qualitative information, because we understand that this can be particularly challenging. And although there is precedence of companies already performing this, there is, cases where, for a company who is starting off on this journey, for them to actually start their disclosures from a qualitative perspective. And then with regards to who does this, there's some really interesting reports from the International Federation of Accountants on who should be performing such activities within an entity. From their perspective, it's really important that there is collaboration, and there's the need to actually break down silos within an entity. But the role of an accountant is of utmost importance, bearing in mind that these standards do complement what an accountant is already doing, bearing in mind that the materiality approach is well understood by accountants, and the look and feel of the actual standards themselves are quite complementary to IFRS accounting standards. So it must be noted that there is a need for collaboration, and perhaps over time there could be some maturity within finance departments to actually support sustainability departments with regards to the controls and the processes needed to actually fulfill appropriate compliance with IFRS S1 and S2.
Thank you, Ravi. That's useful.
Islam. So I had a question. This is Samin from Angro Corporation.
Yes.
One of my questions is about consolidation of data. Since we have multiple businesses and they're in varying industries, it's kind of difficult to figure out what's material for which subsidiary, and then figure out the financial impacts of those ESG factors and then consolidate them. So if there's more, how do we go about doing that? And if there's some kind of capacity building that we can expect. Also, so for instance, if we're using the GRI framework, then we're allowed to, exempt some of the subsidiaries, and it doesn't necessarily have to reflect the same as those that are in our financial reporting. So is there some kind of exemption in IFRS as well? And sorry, my second question is regarding internal carbon prices. These can be very different across the world. So what are the internal carbon prices that we're supposed to choose?
Right. So if I would add further, on the consolidation, Salman, you also asked the same question. So the requirement of overall applicability, that turnover will exactly be the same whether if you are producing your consolidated accounts, and if that is more than, let's say, for the time being 25 billion, yes, the requirement will be taken from that consolidated financial statement. If your particular subsidy is lower than that amount, then of course that requirement will not be on that subsidiary, but on the consolidated. For the materiality part of the consolidation, here the principle is the same as for financial statements. So how do you do that? You do that again on the basis of the materiality definition given in the IFRS. Here, the definition is exactly the same. It is the same concept in sustainability. So on a principal basis, my answer to you is that you will refer to the same materiality as defined in the S1, which is similar to the accounting. So that is on the GRI part, he will further add, but my response is that these IFRS standards are investor focused, right? So the information has to come, or the standards have given what is required by, or what is useful for, as I said, primary users. So it is invested, whereas GRI has a wider society focus. So there's some differences.
Okay, so my understanding is that however the company manages it, you have to make disclosures of that. Okay, so if you as a group is managing all your topics, like you did your materiality assessment at a group level, so that is how you are going to follow the reporting also. So logically, a group should have one set of report, which is like, following the consolidated accounts. But that is may not be the case always, because a group may not pick to manage sustainability at the group level, but they may choose to go for entity specific, because there may be some entities having a larger environmental footprint, so they just want to manage that entity first and not at the group level. So if you're doing that, then there must be some guidance from ICAP that how to do that. Because as Farooq mentioned, I think we should be very clear that we would expect all the groups to follow it at the group level, like consolidation level. But if you don't want to follow it at the group level and you want it entity specific, then maybe ICAP can issue some guidance on that. Secondly, there can be variety of material issues, of divergent issues within the group. So you could have investment in oil and gas, which have different set of issues, and you could have food entities, and you could have other sectors which may have less issues than the particular like oil and gas. So your approach would determine how, and that is what is the expectation, that you would disclose how you're managing your business. So if you're managing your business, giving more emphasis on oil and gas, then that's how you will govern it. That's how you would do your risk management, and that would be so the S1, S2 is the product of your activities. So if you have done your strategy in a certain manner and risk management and then metrics target, then that would be reflected in your reporting. And we're not forcing, I mean, the standard cannot force you to just work back and do your everything, redo your everything just because it is a requirement. It is whatever you're doing already, just make a disclosure of that.
I think a very simple answer. There are questions about consolidation, and as Musrat also suggested, to have an FAQ. So all those questions that will come, and certainly consolidated is something where probably more guidance is required. So we have taken note of that. Let's take last two questions. Zaid, you want to have any question? You're from textile sector.
Okay, so internal carbon pricing is something which if you use, then you will have to make a disclosure. So globally, some companies use that as a tool, because whenever you are managing your carbon footprint, you place a dollar tag to the internal carbon emissions, and then that gives you an advantage or a tool to monitor your emissions. So if you're using that as a tool to reduce your emissions, then you need to disclose it. Otherwise, it's not mandatory.
It's already, the guidance is given in the standard. There are two ways of calculating. They have given the two methods there. So there's already a guidance there in the standard.
My name is Zaid Kalia, and I'm from textile sector. One of the things which I'm thinking about is we need to prepare our teams to properly disclose rather than disclosing for the purpose of disclosures. And we have seen in many cases, whenever new standards come in, people try to disclose for the sake of disclosures. So what I see that we are short of times, even because the timelines are given are too short for this purpose, because we haven't done that. Most of the companies haven't done that. So I would recommend that even if it is voluntary, not extend the timeline, but provide the trainings, provide the sessions, and it should be coming from SCCP as well as from ICAP, that these will be the sessions and trainings we will be providing. And after that, you will have at least 1 year to implement those trainings. This is my recommendation.
Right, right. Thank you, Zaid. We have noted your suggestions.
Financial sectors.
Insurance.
There was a question about insurance and obviously financial sector also. So definitely these two sectors have different dynamics and their disclosures would be obviously different from the rest of the companies. So there would be definitely consultative process with the regulator, State Bank and SACP, because insurance industry, as you mentioned, you have a portfolio. And portfolio assessment requires a lot of time and efforts. And then you make out policies to cleanse your portfolio. So to make it very simple, you right now you have a brown portfolio and you want to segregate it into green portfolio and then black portfolio, and then the brown would be eliminated over time, and then you would move towards green portfolio. So a lot of efforts has to be made before committing on that aspect of insurance business. Your scope 1 and scope 2 is very easy. You are a service sector, so your scope 1 is whatever is your internal emissions, which are in your control. Scope 2 is whatever is your purchased emissions. So you purchase energy from K Electric and WAPDA. So that's very simple. Your scope 3 right now does not include your portfolio, but your portfolio assessment is a must when you do your other risk and opportunities. So when you see what are the risks to your business, if there is a calamity and you are exposed to certain type of assets which are going to be affected because of that calamity, or whatever temperature change or sea level rise. So insurance business is going to be very much part of and is going to be affected because of this whole debate, sustainability. But the approach has to be taken in a careful manner for both the financial sector also, like banks and insurance.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your explanation. लेकिन सर इंश्योरेंस सेक्टर का एक और बड़ा इशू है कि हमारा सेक्टर बहुत कम्पिटिटिव है, और जो कहा कि सब्जेक्टिव नेचर ऑफ रिस्क असेसमेंट है, वो बड़ा इम्पैक्ट करेगा हमारे रेट्स के ऊपर, हमारी ऑफरिंग्स के ऊपर जो हमने क्लाइंट्स को करते हैं. अगर ये यूनिफॉर्मली हर कंपनी के अंदर इस चीज को इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं किया जाएगा, तो इससे जो हमारी कंपनी है या जो मेजर इंश्योरेंस कंपनी है पाकिस्तान के अंदर, उनको बड़ा इम्पैक्ट हो सकता है, क्योंकि हम लोग अपनी रेट्स को कम्पिटिटिवनेस हम लोग अपनी मेंटेन नहीं कर पाएंगे, क्योंकि हम तो इस चीज को इम्प्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं, लेकिन जो छोटी कंपनीज हैं वो इस चीज को इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं कर रही हैं. तो दे कैन ऑफर मतलब कम रेट्स पे या अच्छी ऑफर्स वो कर सकते हैं एज कम्पेयर टू हम जो उसको फॉलो कर रहे हैं. तो ये चीज का इम्पैक्ट हमारे सेक्टर में बड़ा ज्यादा होगा.
ठीक है, नोटेड. आपका बेसिक पॉइंट ये है कि अगर इंश्योरेंस सेक्टर हो तो पूरे इंश्योरेंस सेक्टर के ऊपर हो. अंडरस्टूड. लाइएगा लास्ट 2 क्वेश्चंस ले लें बस. जी महमूश आप कुछ कह रहे थे।
No, thank you. No question as such. I've just been reflecting on the discussion, and mostly the question now is for me, what comes first? Because everybody is talking about different aspects of how we're going to start this whole motion. So, I mean, I think we should first of all be very happy that these standards have come, as you said, right up front, because for the past 2 years most of the corporates have been saying there are no standards to follow, so how can we do anything? Now the standard is here, so that's a great first step that is already in our hand. Of course, I think the regulatory backing is very important, that we have that somehow in the code or etc. for the companies to be pushed one step forward. I'm not sure if having a standard is good enough for people to start following it, but it has to be backed up by some sort of a push from there. And I totally sympathize with those who are talking about capacity building and where are we not ready, etc. Because it is both a question at the board level, as Aslan and Fahim were saying, because we talk to so many corporates, and they're all they recognize that this whole process will kick off at a company level when boards push it down. So and they say 80% of them have said that it is the boards that are going to decide how we're going to move forward. So it's a very important factor, and it's not at a good state right now. But at the same time, it's a huge responsibility at the middle management level to do the job. And even if we convince the boards, they come back to us and say, where are the resources? How are we going to do it? How can we implement this whole thing? We have to have enough people going around it. So I think capacity building both at the board level, or let's say influencing at the board level, and capacity building at the management level has to be also happening at the same time. So it all has to kick in now and together. I'm not very sure about this timeline bit, because when you say 1 year, I've also commented on the fact that if you say 2025 you have to report, then those people who are saying that there's a lot of technical work behind it, they will need to start doing their baselines as of 1st January 2024. And to be able to draw their baselines, do they have the tools? So we have 4 months to go. I'm not sure if people are ready to do it. So that's why my view would have also been that let's push it, give them this whole year to do their baselining, and then they start to measure. Because they can only report against the baseline. Otherwise, it will be all they will report is we don't know how good we are, or we don't know how well we are doing in our emotions. We need to have a baseline to be able to report. So that's my humble submission, that we can probably look at a little bit of a time frame going forward in terms of developing a baseline. And during that period, the capacity can be built. But in 4 months, starting today, it will be very difficult to build capacity and start baselining. Thank you.
Right. That's good. Yoshi.
Ji. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Farooq, for organizing such a wonderful session. You see, I think my conclusion coming out from here is, again, the tone from the top needs to be set for the corporate governance, okay? And till that tone is not set, really, people at the accountant level and whatever middle level will start doing this. What I'm looking actually is from the SECP that, they should, or at least from that side, is that corporate governance framework on sustainability or some sort of guidelines are issued, which should be done rather quickly in terms of like how we have that an audit committee is required at the board level. So, things like that. What are the key critical factors that a board needs to have in place to ensure that the sustainability agenda is being taken seriously? There should be talks. Is it applicable on us or not applicable? Why is it not applicable, and why is it applicable, and which subsidiaries? And so I think, and training, I think that's the most critical that I see. So at the top level, I don't see at the corporate level, I don't see a lot of discussions on sustainability in terms of how we are going to execute it within our organization. Whilst people are aware that, yes, this is an important agenda, I think that seriousness needs to be brought in through these sort of guidelines. And I'd agree the agenda is too big for 2025. And one more observation I had was that, the sustainability agenda expects you or expects an organization to also understand the industry dynamics in terms of, climate change or whatever it is. Now, in Pakistan, I don't see a lot of information published generally also. So this is also, again, something that the regulators should be gathering some industry practices or some organization gathering information, because otherwise it will lead to wrong interpretations and wrong conclusions by different companies will interpret its industry understanding. So there should be some published materials in Pakistan about each industry, etc. My third observation is, I think greenwashing is a very important topic. And now what that actually means to me is that then if a company has disclosed its sustainability areas and the auditors have audited, it is going to be quite challenging for the auditors to pick up greenwashing areas, because what it means is that it's not an expertise of the auditor or their skill set, because you may be required to have engineering or technical knowledge to maybe measure the water or the pollution, etc., and all that. So I see a lot of challenges on that front as well, because at the end of the day, it is a matter of reputation. If some greenwashing comes up on a company that has been signed off on sustainability, so these are the kind of things that I note.
Thank you, Khurshid. As far as making people aware and guidances, we are in discussion with ISSP to have their permission to publish many of their material. So hopefully that we'll be doing in a week's time, and there will be more publications coming. As far as the assurance part is concerned, Arsalan is already working on it, and that draft standard exposure draft already exposed to members, and there will be more guidance coming. But certainly your points are valid, and we'll be taking count of that. We have just 2 more minutes. Anyone? Salman, you want to add something? Or
the mic, please.
So thank you for organizing this. सारे मैटर सारे कवर हो गए. Broadly, I think right now जो अगला 6-8 महीने spend करना है वो upskilling पे करना है, because there is going to be a serious challenge with respect to it is corporate reporting. थोड़ी सी पूरे system को अपने आप को learn करना होगा. So tone at the top, tone setting the tone for skilling. I think I represent services. तो professional firms को अपनी खुशी ने भी मुझे बात की एक massive upskilling program करना पड़ेगा. I think ICAP has a role to play in it, just to create the right level of skilling in the system. ताकि जब report ultimately public reporting है, so reporting पे एक trust build करने के लिए एक large scale upskilling जो है, I think should be the way going forward. Apart from everything what is it, I actually think going in a phase way criteria वो ठीक है, you can judge कि 25 billion होना चाहिए, 50 billion होना चाहिए. That is fine. I think we should look at certain targeted sectors. मेरी आपसे जब बात भी हुई थी कि certain targeted sectors को हमें देखना चाहिए. Probably consolidation के उसमें चैलेंज आएगा. अभी एंग्रो ने क्वेश्चन पूछा, उनकी जो probably सबसे बड़ी impact कंपनी है वो unlisted है. So वो उस तरह के challenges आएंगे. उस consolidation के need to insurance वालों का point, but so there will be some challenges system को अभी. तो मेरे हिसाब से 4 महीने मेमोज का ये मुझे थोड़ी सी अग्रेसिव लग रही है. Maybe 25 should probably be the right time. इस साल थोड़ी अग्रेसिव लग रही है मुझे. Thanks.
Noted. Zishan, you want to say something?
First of all, thank you very much. I mean, it's an excellent session.
And what I loved about the session is the participation and the energy. And everybody has their fear factor there, but the commitment seems to be there also. So that's the positive sign. It is coming, and everybody wants to contribute, think about things, and strategize those things. Because in any case, this will be there now, tomorrow, day after tomorrow. So I mean, वो जैसे कहते हैं ना कबूतर की तरह आंखें बंद करने से कुछ नहीं होना. We have to be prepared for that actually. So, mashallah, excellent session.
Thank you very much, Farooq Saab. I'm thankful to SCCP and your team for arranging this session. Well, I was thinking that in Game of Thrones terminology, winter is coming. For as far as the corporate finance professionals are concerned, who are doing corporate reporting, and the audit partners are concerned, some more work to be done. And I think it will be huge, vast opportunity for the networking that we need to do with cross professionals like engineers and other professionals. And there will be a lot of learning for all of us, I'm very sure, when we have to learn about different aspects of ESG reporting and these things, because it will be actually a learning curve for all of us. And to actually do networking with those professionals will actually be another opportunity for us professionals as well. So I think on one side it is difficult, yes, but on the other brighter side, it is more avenue for firms, practices, and challenges for the industry to cope up with, but for a better future and better environment, which should be our combined goal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll be coming to Lahore soon with a similar session. And उसको करेंगे बात. कानित, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे? नहीं? Thank you. Right. So this brings us to end. Sir, you want to add last?
Just to conclude, while I completely agree with Khurshid's observations, and as I mentioned also that we are coming up with these disclosure guides as well as regulatory guide. And also, Mimosh will watch on it, that we, as part of the directors training program, to create that sense of responsibility and accountability at the top, ESG is going to be part of the directors. It's going to be a component of the directors training program as well. So basically, so that the directors on the boards realize their responsibilities and take the ownership.
Thank you. Right, great. So I think with that, this ends from a Q&A session, and over to you, Babar, and the closing remark. Thank you.
Let's hear it for the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Might I add, this panel lasted for at least an hour. So yes, we all contributed. We had a wonderful time. But wait, there's always more. For the closing remarks, please welcome Vice President ICAP, Mr. Aslan Khalid.
So I think in any ICAP event, we have all that formal closing remarks. But already, I think we have a good round of closing remarks already. I think the best thing about ESG is that, from ICAP, SECP, PICG, we have been able to build at least an ecosystem where, there is a combined voice in the country to be serious about ESG, not only reporting, but also the effort that the companies are making to be compliant with the ESG requirements. So the responsibility that the corporate sector has to display on the ESG subject, I think whether it's regulator, whereas ICAP as an accountancy body, or the governance body, PICG, we have tried to come together to make a case that this is something which is not just a compliance requirement. This is something which will define the future of investment and in the corporate sector in Pakistan. Because when we start talking about the need for investment in the country, imagine a scenario where after 2-3 years the world will be analyzing the investment cases on the basis of not only financial performance, but also on the basis of the ESG ratings. And the investors will not tick mark any investment opportunity unless you have a decent ESG disclosure. So that is an imperative for the business. And when we talk about implementing the standards, obviously the confusion always and the fear factor is the knowledge gap that we have. And it's not only for Pakistan, it's around the world, there is a knowledge gap. And upskilling is required, but who will do that upskilling? ICAP, SECP, PICG can play their role as facilitators. But I think maybe there is a need for the corporate sector to have a dialogue with the universities operating in Pakistan and also elsewhere to see what courses they are designing for the future ESG professionals in Pakistan. So there has to be a curriculum designed for ESG professionals in the universities and the business schools that we have in Pakistan. And for that, the corporate sector, there's a demand, and we have to work on the supply side. And the corporate sector needs to provide that kind of a requirement to the universities so that in 2 to 3 years' time, we have a good number of ESG professionals in the country who will bridge this knowledge gap that exists today. The investment, so we cannot have a ESG journey without cost and investment. So it will happen, and the corporate sector would have to make that investment, would have to build that capacity. So ICAP, SECP can play its part as a facilitator in building the environment, in making sure that things are done under a defined framework and provide reliefs where required. But what it cannot do is build capacities within the companies to basically comply with the ESG requirements. Those risk and opportunity analysis, those scenario analysis will happen within the companies, within the boardrooms, with experts and the ESG professionals. So that breed is needed in the country, and the universities have to think about designing really courses specifically to meet that demand. So that's, I think, the PICG maybe can raise more, I would say, voice on that area, that you have to be engaged with the universities to have lots of ESG professionals in times to come who may not, who will just not be serving Pakistan, but maybe the markets near shore. So that's what I would say, that, building capacity means that we have to be engaged with all the stakeholders beyond the regulators, and also the board and the directors needs to be more educated. Perhaps we can have a master class for the directors community to make them more aware of the ESG terminologies and the governance and the emphasis that it requires going forward. Thank you so much, all of you.
And thank you, Mr. Assalan, for your closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of today's session. I hope all of you had a wonderful time. We all learned a lot. And this brings us to the end of the seminar. We have lunch arrangements. If you can make your ways outside, if there's a lift, you can take that to the second floor. We have lunch arrangements. But before that, I'd like to request the dignitaries to come up on stage for a group photo. And anyone else who'd like to join them, please come on up here. Thank you all.